I have no cutesy title for you this morning, simply the God who judges and saves. And it is such because I was pretty broken up this morning, as is custom for me to get slides together at the early hours, 4 a.m., 4:30, as I'm thinking, what is it that the people of God need to hear this day? And as I'm thinking through this and I'm going through Noah and the ark and the flood, I'm thinking the vast majority of us have heard this multiple times. The vast majority of us have seen baby blankets that have the cute little boat and the lion with the cute mane and everything. And thinking, okay, well, how do we just kind of like spice this up so that we see this morning a commonly known story from Scripture as something from a different angle? And I guess I came to the conclusion that there's no need to. That the only angle that we need to see this from today is the angle that Moses intended for it to be seen, which is an angle that says there is a God who is good, who relates to evil and says it is not good. Right? In the very beginning, God looks at what he has made and he said it is good. And then sin enters the human experience. We, and our first parents, we sinned, and the race falls into ruin. And as we look at the flood, and as we see what happened in the flood, what I would ask you to keep your eyes peeled for is that the judgment of the flood makes perfect sense if we understand how evil sin is. Okay? Last week, I think you were hopefully helped by something I said. I know I was helped by it as I was preaching, is that sin is ultimately, we talk about depravity of man. We think, okay, well, maybe this act is better than another act, and this act is worse than another act, and thinking, how could it be that God would look at humanity and say, well, these are all evil people? And remember, you peel back all the layers, regardless of whatever good things people may do in the sight of others, there's this fundamental disposition of the human heart that looks at God and says, I don't want you, I just want what you give me. And that is evil. And so if we understand that that principle exists in every human heart, and that even though most of us are not ever going to go out and physically take someone's life or steal things from another person, the reality is that we are haters of God by nature. By haters of God, again, I mean we look at him and say, I don't want you. I want what you can give me, but I don't want you. And so if we understand this is what's coursing through the hearts of humanity, and we see the flood and we think, how evil a thing is it to take what God has made as good and to ruin it? And that's what we see. I hope that over the past couple of months we've looked at Genesis, it's been helpful for you to track from the beginning God makes and it's good to man ruins. And what we see today is the natural and appropriate response of a God who judges, but also of a God who saves. So I will be reading for us kind of as we go. Typically I'd read for you the whole passage, but there's a lot here. There's a lot of passage here. And so I'm going to read little chunks and then interject from there and preach on those passages as we go along. But I'm going to start out with these first, 5-6 verses to give you your big idea, that you can write it down, take a picture of it, and I guess commit it to heart. Right after what we looked at last week, Moses records this. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. So just a little word here as we take this journey with Noah. Please don't think it a unique thing for this time period, from Cain and Abel to Noah's day, as though it was particularly corrupt. Okay? I would argue that we are probably more corrupt now than we were then, simply because the proliferation of the human race means there are more corrupt hearts in this world. And it does not take much effort for us to turn a phone on and to scroll through any social media accounts to find envy and greed and lust and violence and anger and hatred represented with little thumb taps on a 6.4-inch device. And imagine if given to ourselves the types of things that we can produce in that environment, what we would be otherwise capable of. So just a little word of preface there. Let's categorize these people as different than us. So here's your big idea. Again, nothing super glitzy about it, but you need to hear it. In the account of the flood, we see a God who in his goodness deals with evil, in his mercy promises to save, and in his grace works on behalf of the undeserving. So in the account of the flood, what I want you to see is primarily God, okay? If we go through the Bible, and a lot of times we'll think, oh, this story about Noah. It's not a story about Noah. It's a story about God. The whole Bible is a story about God. It is God as the main character, and any time that we kind of distract ourselves by looking at the sub-characters in the story, we're missing the point. The point of Noah and the flood, Noah and the ark, Noah and his family was not that Noah was this particularly great guy, but that there is a God who works. There is a God who in his goodness looks at evil and says, this must be dealt with. There's a God who in his mercy says, there are some people, this world is filled with people who deserve nothing but my wrath and justice, and yet I will save. And there's a God who does so, who saves, not because we've made ourselves attractive to him, but because he is gracious and works on behalf of the undeserving. So good versus evil. Genesis 6:11 through 13. Again, the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. I want you to picture this. All right? We have a sanitary culture in as much as we don't like to look bad. And in many ways, the restraining common grace of God has been active in Western culture for several hundred years because of the influence of the gospel on Western culture. But it doesn't mean that this is necessarily different. All it means is that there are societal restraints. There are these. We don't want to be that type of person, right? But if you go to other cultures, you go around the world where the gospel has not had much of an influence. You think, go to China 25 years ago, and what do you find? You should kill little girls. That's 25 years ago, right? Socially acceptable in an effort to pursue the maintaining of a bloodline through a son and a policy of a government that says human life means nothing except what we can control with it, that if you have a little girl, she should die. Okay? That is a blatant disregard for human life that most everybody in this room has lived in the midst of. We think about the culture that exists in our own country today, where people, in the name of celebrating freedom and personal autonomy, will say that it is good for a woman to have instruments put into her body to kill a baby. It is evil. It is absolutely wicked. And the only reason why we might say, oh, well, the Chinese culture is worse is because it's just not as public, right? But when the politics enters into the picture and you start glossing it over and saying, oh, well, this is a good thing. It's actually it's a virtue. It's a benefit to society. It's a benefit to the individual. And you just peel the layers back and think, what's going on? We think the earth is corrupt in God's sight. The earth was filled with violence. Today, there will be thousands of children murdered by their parents. And mostly, it's not cared about. So again, this is not a galaxy far, far away a long time ago. We live with it right now. It just might be kind of glossed over. God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for And this is where we have to say God is not capricious. There's a reason God gives as to why judgment would come. For the earth is filled, because the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. And then in Genesis 7:17 through 24, this is what we kind of close our passage with this morning. It said, the flood continued 40 days on the earth. So God opens the heavens, right? The firmament, which existed prior to the flood, this canopy of waters over the earth, the heavens are opened and a deluge comes. The fountains of the deep open up and all of this water comes and it just absolutely devastates everything. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth and the ark floated on the face of the waters and the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, and all flesh died that moved on the earth. Birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. So in Genesis chapter 5, which we moved past, okay, in interest of time, gave you a little synopsis of it, we have the generations of Adam, right? And Adam has a son, and his son dies. And this goes on over and over and over. Die, characterizes the life of each and every son of Adam, except for Enoch, who uniquely walked with God. And then we have something here that is ridiculously startling, because we have individuals dying. They're being noted for their death. And yet, in Genesis 7 here, the description of what's happening with the flood, Moses records, everything died. Everything. Okay? There are some helpful pieces of artwork in the history of Western culture that I think capture this for us. There's a Gustav, I forget what his last name was, has some wood carvings, some etchings that capture just this sense of kind of peril. Kevin Young, as he was preaching about this, referenced him and went and looked at it. I'm like, yeah, this is a good picture. It's not little lions and hippos. It's families effectively banging on the door of the ark, let me in, after ignoring the warnings of a good God who judges evil. It's just death. It's horrific. But it's the consequence of sin. So the goodness of God necessitates that evil be shown for what it is and addressed in consequent judgment. This is probably one of the most, regular objections people will give to the gospel and thinking about the God of the Bible, right? Because there's a God that people want to construct for themselves quite frequently, a God who is all fluff, a God who is all bunnies, a God who is all kittens, and who you can be approached and just say, oh, he's just always for me, he's doing things and it's just going to make my life happy. And that's not the God who is. The God who is actually good. Right? Because if you think about the grandfather, we'll give this kind of grandfatherly picture, the grandfather who you go to and you say, hey, Grandpa, I would really like this. I'd love a new Lego set. And Grandpa's like, okay, sounds good. Let's get you a new Lego set. I'd like some new baseball cards. I get some new baseball cards. I'd like some new Barbie dolls. Get some new Barbie dolls. And so this goes on, and Grandpa's giving you all these things. And then one day you go to Grandpa and say, Grandpa, this man hit me. Grandpa, this person hurt me. And the grandpa says, I'm only here for Legos. I can't do anything about that for you. I'm just going to sit in my rocking chair, and you'll only know me as one who deals with nice, happy things. I'll never protect you. I'll never judge evil done against you. The God who is God who, in his goodness, deals with evil. And in the flood, we're seeing this happen. Remember Genesis 6:5 last week? The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. This is the Bible's assessment of the human condition. I will not tire of reminding us of this because we are commonly encouraged, even within Christian circles. Right? I don't want to just talk here about the issue of people in the culture around us who say, "Oh, this is a particularly nice thing to do and be this kind of person." There is a Christian segment, a Christian contingent that says just good, nice, happy things. Good people who do nice, happy people things. But if we want a biblical assessment, we have to see that God says there is something wrong with all of us. There is something wrong with all of us. 1 John chapter 3, verse 4, here is how the Apostle John, who talks a lot about love, right? Talks a lot about love. He also talks a lot about bad things, evil things. And this is a characterization of human sinfulness that I think is a helpful angle for us. Everyone who makes a practice of sinning also practices lawlessness. Sin is lawlessness. So if we conceive of sin as just this abstract thing. We can just put it out there and say, "Oh, I do bad things." But here's how John, and as he's contrasting the work of Christ in the human heart with what otherwise would be present, he says, if you want to know what sin is like breaking the law repeatedly. Okay, and just if you catch like on the news sometimes or websites where it'll detail what's gone on with people who have broken the law, and you see these mugshots of people, and then you'll see people who are like these habitual offenders, and like, oh, there's that person again. There's that person again breaking the law, and the cops arrest this person and bring him back in, and then he goes out and in and out and in and out and in. And John would say that for the human heart, we are like that habitual offender, that we're constantly breaking God's law. The way that we operate as human beings is a lawless way. And so if we're thinking about Noah and we're thinking the flood and the days leading up to it and just, all of these poor people, we think, what is this corruption? What does this look like? What does this corruption look like in action? And it is a breaking of the law, breaking of God's good law, his holy character being transgressed repeatedly. Sin is lawlessness. And so God in his goodness looks at this and says, I am good and I must deal with evil. Okay, don't ever miss that as you think about how God relates to people. Because again, there is this tendency for us to just kind of to maybe even agree with some people who say, how could a good God? How could a good God? How could a good God? And you have to turn it around and say, how could a good God tolerate me? How could a good God tolerate what I have done? How could a good God tolerate the evil I have committed, the sin that I have committed against other people, the sin I've committed against him? How could a good God let me live? And so really that is the question to turn around. And when we think about the flood, we're thinking this is a God who is good. And in his goodness, he looks out on all of this lawlessness and says, I have to do something about this. In Psalm 5, 4-6, the psalmist says, you are not a God who delights in wickedness. Evil may not dwell with you. The boastful shall not stand before your eyes. You hate all evildoers. You destroy those who speak lies. The Lord abhors the bloodthirsty and deceitful man. Now, again, this sounds good in theory. God does not delight in wickedness. We want that kind of a God, right? We want a God who doesn't delight in wrongdoing. If somebody comes and sexually assaults you, you want a God who does not delight in that. You want a God who, when you experience the most heinous acts of personal offense against you, doesn't look at it and wink at it. You want a God who says, this is serious. And it's so serious that I personally will deal with it. Jeremiah chapter 12, the prophet issues these words, and they're interesting. You may not have read this before, except maybe you go through the Bible in a year plan, but I want to kind of help contextualize something for you as we think about this idea of God in his goodness dealing with evil, right? That the reason why the flood comes is because God is good. He's not capricious. This is not a whim. This is a God who in his goodness deals with evil. So Jeremiah says this, Righteous are you, O Lord, when I complain to you, yet I would plead my case before you. Why does the way of the wicked prosper? Why do all who are treacherous thrive? You plant them and they take root, they grow and produce fruit. You are near in their mouth and far from their heart, but you, O Lord, know me. You see me and test my heart toward you. Pull them out like sheep for the slaughter and set them apart for the day of slaughter. How long will the land mourn? The grass of every field wither. For the evil of those who dwell in it, the beasts and the birds are swept away because they said, he will not see our latter end. So as Jeremiah is looking on this landscape, saying that this people, this evil is prospering. Evil seems to just be taking root everywhere. And surely if you have walked with Jesus for any length of time, you have had moments like this where you have looked and you've seen somebody that you know and you've said, God, I don't understand why this person seems to be getting away with this. I don't understand why it is that these people are thriving and I'm seeking to honor you and I don't understand. Now there is a comfort for you, Christian, in this, to know that there are two places that evil will be dealt with or have been dealt with. One is the cross of Christ and one is hell. Those are the only two options. The only two options. Option one is that God judges evil in the person of his Son. And option two is that for an individual who will not take refuge in Christ, that they will themselves bear the penalty for their sin. And so even though it may seem it's prospering, you think in Noah's day, he's looking and he's seeing this multitude of people. We've got like this 120-year warning where Noah is building this ark and he's a preacher of righteousness. The Bible says he's a preacher of righteousness. And he has to be thinking as people are, what would it be like for you to go and to be preaching that God's judgment is coming? And you can be safe if you'll take refuge in this ark. You can be safe if you'll take refuge in this thing that God has provided, and people will mock you. Okay? I personally have had some weird experiences sharing the gospel before with people, and I'm not a generally, censorious person. When I share the gospel with people, I try to be as earnest and kind as possible. But I found in the moments where I've shared the truth of God's grace, his undeserved favor with people, is when people get the angriest. It's not the moments where they hear about their sin deserving God's righteous judgment. It's when you say the only thing you can deal with it, the only thing to deal with it is to go to him. You can't make yourself good. You can't do this yourself. You must rest in him. You must declare personal bankruptcy in the sight of God and say, there's only one thing I can do, and that is to cast myself upon your mercy. And that's when people get the angriest. And so as Noah is preaching in his day, and he's saying there is a way to be safe, and you can be saved from the coming wrath of God if you will take refuge in the promise that he has made. And so in my day, I've had things like hot dog buns thrown at me. I've had personal threats. I've had people grab me by the head and slap me in the face in moments of just sharing the goodness of God in offering grace to people. And so you imagine Noah for 120 years preaching coming judgment of God and a way of salvation that's found only by casting yourself upon his mercy, and people want nothing to do with it. And yet at the same time, these same people don't want injury against them to go unpunished. And so I think this is a helpful statement for you here. Just kind of, tuck this in your front pocket next time you talk with someone. Everyone wants a good God who deals justly with evil, just not the evil we commit. We all want a God who will actually deal with evil, but we don't want a God who will deal with our evil. Okay? And so as we think about how God is dealing with, how he's addressing, how he is laying bare the sinfulness of humanity, just remember that this is a wholesale experience, and that as we move into this next point about God mercifully saving, is that the only hope we do have is that the God whom we have sinned against will make a way for us to be made right with him. So in judgment, salvation, Genesis 6:14-21, here is the instruction. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark and cover it inside and outside with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth 50 cubits, and its height 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark, and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die, but I will establish my covenant with you. And you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind, 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. So as we consider here what God is doing, as he is providing a way, right? He is providing a way to be rescued, to be saved in the midst of this judgment. We must recognize something. There is a way, and it is God's way. Noah is not given like this idea. Noah, figure it out yourself. God doesn't say to Noah, this might happen someday. Just find something to deal with. He's giving him explicit instructions for how to avoid the coming judgment. And this is God's way throughout history. He makes promises, and in these promises we find that there is refuge to be taken. God makes promises to people saying, there is a depth to your sin you don't understand, and yet I am a merciful and gracious God, and if you will trust me, if you will look at my promises and say, this is a trustworthy God, and if I put my hope in him. You think if Noah doesn't build the ark, what happens, right? Now that's a hypothetical because Noah did build the ark, but you think what would happen if Noah did not trust the promises of God? Noah and his family would have been swept away just like everybody else. And so the salvation that Noah experienced is the same salvation that any human being who is saved by God in the midst of judgment experiences, which is he saves according to his way of saving. We don't come up with it ourselves. So carry it forward to the 21st century, and you talk to somebody and say, I think God will ... I think God looks at ... And it's like, friend, this has never been the case with God. God has always been a God who saves on his terms. Genesis 7, 6-10, Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters came upon the earth. And Noah and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him went into the ark to escape the waters of the flood, of clean animals and of animals that are not clean, and of birds and of everything that creeps on the ground. 2 and 2, male and female, went into the ark with Noah as God had commanded Noah. And after 7 days, the waters of the flood came upon the earth. So in the midst of deserved judgment, God has always extended mercy through promises of salvation, through trust in his promises, okay? So I don't want this to seem like a circular thing for you any more than it ought to be, which is the way that we experience God's saving work is to see that God is at the center of it, right? So a good God who must deal with evil looks on sinful people and says, there is a way for you. There is a way for you. There is a way for you to experience freedom from the judgment you deserve, but you have to trust what I am saying to you. If you're a parent, you have likely had a conversation with your child. I've had several because I find that it's a unique responsibility of mine as a dad to try to reflect God's character to my kids. And part of that is to tell them, if you want things to go well for you, you must trust me. You must trust me. I am your father. I know what is best for you. If you strike out on your own, and if you seek to do things on your own, it will not go well for you. But you must trust me. And if you trust me, son, if you trust me, daughter, it will go well for you. And this is how God has always dealt with people. He makes promises to be trusted. Genesis 3:15, which we saw a handful of weeks ago, is the first promise. And it's a promise that Eve and Adam end up believing, is evident in how they named their children. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So there is judgment here. There is judgment upon the serpent, right? The serpent is going to be crushed by the seed of a woman. A promise is that someday this will happen. And so as Eve and as Adam hear this, they're thinking, okay, we really messed up and we gave in to this and we have become enemies of God. And the only way that we can find hope The only way that we can find hope that this enemy of God that we have followed will himself be dealt with is if we trust that God himself will fulfill his promise. And in the ark, what we find is a God who promises Noah, if you do this, if you will trust me, you will live. If you trust me, you will live. Hebrews 11:7. Here's what the author of Hebrews says regarding Noah. I want you to consider these first two words. By faith, Noah, being warned by God concerning events as yet unseen, in reverent fear, constructed an ark for the saving of his household. By this he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. So what does it mean here that Noah condemned the world? All right, does this mean that Noah wrote this lengthy treatise? The world should be condemned. That's not what's happening here. That's not what the author of Hebrews is recording. The author of Hebrews is recording is saying that as an individual trusts in the promises of God, he is showing that it is impossible for sinful humanity to contrive of a way to take God's place or to find reconciliation with him. It is impossible. It's literally impossible for that to happen. And so in Noah, as he trusts God in this seemingly very foolish thing, right? Let's build a giant boat in the middle of wherever. Right, let's build a giant boat, let's spend our life savings, let's chop down all the trees, and let's spend all of our time, get our kids busy on this project. It seems like a very foolish thing. And yet what's highlighted here is the reason why this occurred is because Noah trusted God. God's promise was that salvation will come if you will trust me. 2 Peter chapter 2, Peter says, "For if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into hell and committed them to chains of gloomy darkness to be kept until the judgment, if he did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah, a herald of righteousness with 7 others when he brought a flood upon the world of the ungodly, if by turning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes he condemned them to extinction, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly, and if he rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard. Then the Lord knows how to rescue the godly from trials and to keep the unrighteous under punishment until the day of judgment, and especially those who indulge in the lust of defiling passion and despise authority." So as Peter is drawing forward this example of Noah, he is drawing forward an example that says, Christian, you can trust God will save you. You can trust God will protect you. You can trust God will keep you. God will take care of you. Even if the world around you seems to be absolutely crumbling and falling apart, you don't need to give in. You don't need to live like them. You can trust God. And he gives examples then of Noah. He gives an example of Lot. He gives an example of these who said, this may seem very foolish to everybody around me. It may seem a very ridiculous thing, but I will look at God's promises and say he is more trustworthy than even my own inclinations. He's more trustworthy than my sense of, oh man, this is embarrassing. He is more trustworthy than anyone. And that the way that we experience God's preserving and saving work is by trusting him. Isaiah chapter 10, the prophet says, "In that day the remnant of Israel and the survivors of the house of Jacob will no more lean on him who struck them, but will lean on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, in truth. A remnant will return, the remnant of Jacob, to the mighty God. For though your people Israel be as the sand of the sea, only a remnant of them will return. Destruction is decreed, overflowing with righteousness." So why do I bring this up for you? Why do I bring up this strangely obscure passage in Isaiah? It's because the Apostle Paul brings this passage forward in the book of Romans. And he brings it forward because the question is often asked then, this seems like a strange thing. These like, how? Doesn't it make sense that God just saves good people? Doesn't it make sense that God just looks at nice dispositions and that he works that way? And somebody tries hard enough. And so Paul responds to this type of question that's asked rhetorically. And it's specifically saying, but what about all these nice Jewish people who have kept the law for all of these years? And Paul pulls this forward and says, God preserves a remnant. We don't do this for ourselves. That when God saves, he doesn't look at us and say, what particularly impressive people. He looks at us and he works graciously and he holds out what seems to be a foolish thing, which is trust his promises over against your own sense of, I did well, your own sense of how you ought to relate or make this God relate to you. It's to say, God preserves his people. God calls his people. And that brings us to the why me. Genesis 6:9, these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. Now, does this mean that Noah was a sinless individual? And the good news is that it doesn't mean that. The good news is that what we're seeing here is another example of how God, in his gracious favor, takes a man out of his environment in a world that he would otherwise participate in and love like everyone else, and says, you are going to be different. You are going to be different. Salvation and judgment comes to undeserving people who by God's grace alone rest in his promises. Hebrews 11, 1 through 2, this is what starts off the whole chapter, talking about the saints of old who lived by faith. The author says, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen, for by it the people of old received their commendation. So this commendation that we're talking about here, as we think about what was special about Noah as he lived in his day, how was he blameless in his generation? Noah's blamelessness was not found in his performance. We will get to this in a couple of weeks. Noah gets off the ark and gets absolutely wasted after planting a vineyard and making his own wine. Okay? Absolutely inane. You experience the saving work of God. You watch your neighbors and friends and relatives just get obliterated by this flood because of sin, and you're preaching righteousness. And then, hey, you know what? Let's wait for the grapes to get cultivated, and they're going to get cultivated, and then we're gonna like squeeze the juice out of these grapes, and then we're going to wait for this to ferment, and then we're going to drink a lot of it and get completely blitzed. That's what Noah did. It's absolutely foolish. But what I'm thankful for, and you'll see this as we go throughout the book of Genesis, is that God frequently highlights the failures of these saints to show us that he is the main character. He is the point of this book. And so as we consider Noah being blameless in his generation, it says very little about Noah and very much about God. That God took this man and he saved him. So by faith, Noah, that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. His commendation came because in spite of his poor performance, Noah looked and said, God, I trust you. Now, Noah surely lived a more righteous life than just his poor performance in that vineyard. But please, don't miss the point here. The point is that God works graciously to save people who don't deserve it. Romans 11, 2 through 6, here is what I referenced just previously regarding Paul bringing forward this passage. Do you not know what the scripture says of Elijah, how he appeals to God against Israel? Lord, they have killed your prophets, they have demolished your altars, I alone am left, and they seek my life. But what is God's reply to him? I have kept for myself 7,000 men who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So too at the present time there is a remnant chosen by grace. But if it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace would no longer be grace. So as this complaint is perceived by Paul, he's thinking, what about all these nice people who do these nice things? He's saying, look, people are made right with God on the basis of God's sovereign grace. And he says if it's not by that completely, it's not by it at all. If it is by grace, it is no longer on the basis of works. Otherwise, grace would no longer be grace. It's not grace plus. Right? One of the most disastrous statements of the Mormon religion. They take Ephesians chapter 2 and they make a complete mess of it when they say, for by grace you have been saved through faith. And then they add something to it. After all that we can do. You know how ridiculously ungodly that is. It is no grace. It is no grace if you have contributed something to it. It is no grace if you have recommended yourself and said, I know that I may not be perfect, God, but I'm certainly better than these people around me. And so because of that, you should save me. And then, oh, well, that's grace. That's not grace. Grace is God justifies the ungodly. He takes ungodly people, he plucks us up out of our love for sin and says, you will be mine. This is what God does. And so as Elijah is saying, he's saying, God, please, I feel like I'm the only one left here. I'm alone. I'm looking around me. We've got Ahab. We've got Jezebel. And it seems like I'm the only person left. I'm the only person left in the entire nation who cares about you. And God says to him, he says, Elijah, I know my people. And even though you may not understand it, I've got 7,000 people who have not bowed the knee to this other God. And I know my people, and I keep them. Does it not remind you of Jesus' language in John chapter 10, where he says, I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. My sheep hear my voice and follow me. So, Christian, if you hear Jesus' voice and you hear him speaking to you clearly in his word, then rejoice because it is evidence of God's grace toward you, not because you are particularly intelligent or spiritual. Because you hear Jesus' voice and he says, dear one, you hear me because you're my sheep. You don't get made a sheep by responding. You are a sheep, so you do respond. You are a sheep, so you hear. You are a sheep, and you hear the master's voice, the good shepherd's voice, and you say, Jesus, I want no one else. How could I go to anyone else? And Noah, as this sheep who does dumb sheep things like the rest of us do, he hears God's voice, and he trusts God's promise. I'm going to finish in 1 Corinthians to emphasize this point as Paul talks to the self-impressed church at Corinth, people who demonstrate the wonderful ability of humanity to take the good things of God, even the grace of God, and to make it about us. And Paul says this to the church at Corinth. He says, when I came to you, brothers, didn't come proclaiming to you the testimony of God with lofty speech or wisdom. For I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling, and my speech and my message were not in plausible words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, so that your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Now, does this mean that Paul came and he just did all these really exciting things and fireworks? No, it means here, just prior to this, which we'll see, the power of God is the demonstration of the cross of Christ. And so as he preaches to the Corinthians, what he is hoping that they will do is not put their trust in his ability to impress them. He's saying, I decided that when I came among you, what I would communicate is the way of salvation that God has provided, a way that he has provided so that it will be evident that it comes from him. This is grace in action. Noah is saved. Noah is saved through faith by the grace of God. So from beginning to end of the Bible, this is what we see. God makes promises, and people believe those promises because God has graciously opened their hearts to believe those promises, which is why in 1 Corinthians 1:26, we hear Paul saying this just before when he said in chapter 2, consider your calling, brothers, and I say this to all of us here. Consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you were in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, that the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. So in Noah's salvation, what we're seeing is this in action, right? It seems absolutely foolish to the world around him that he should build this ark. Absolutely foolish, but it's not foolish because God has said, I'm going to choose to do something here in your life, Noah, that the world around you will seem foolish so that it might be clear it comes from me. And this is what we find finally evidence in the cross of Christ, right? We see a crucified God. We see a crucified God. And people will look at that and say that what a weak God this must be. What a foolish thing this must be. There must be this grand wisdom, and there must be these personal attainments, these spiritual experiences that must be had in order to say, oh yes, I am more spiritual than somebody else. And Paul says, God never designed it to happen that way. It's always been designed from the very beginning that his promises seem absolutely foolish in the eyes of people who are committed to their own sin, committed to self-glorification. But when eyes are opened to see that God saves undeserving people, eyes are open and we see God would be gracious to me. That God would be gracious to me. I have sinned against him. Why should he be gracious to me? I am not impressive. I have not done enough. I am not a good person. God would be gracious to me. And that the only thing I have to do is trust his promise. And I will find life. That's the story of Noah. Next week, we'll continue and move in the direction of seeing Noah's ridiculous decision making. But please, Christian, be encouraged today that if you find yourself in the ark of Christ, you find yourself in an ark that has been provided by grace, you have realized through faith, and you're being spared from unspeakably great judgment that all of us deserve. Worship team.